The first is to rise in support of advancing the nomination of Elizabeth Watson to serve as the Assistant Secretary for Congressional and Intergovernmental Affairs at the Department of Labor. Ms. Watson is a highly qualified nominee who was nominated in April of last year, almost a year ago now. She has spent most of her career advocating for workers through labor and economic policy. Ms. Watson previously served as Labor Policy Director and Chief Labor Counsel on the House Committee on Education and Labor. Given her labor expertise and commitment to public service, she would be an enormous asset to the Department of Labor. It's past due that Congress, the Senate I should say, confirm her nomination. Ms. Watson is one of many excellent pro-worker nominees that have been put forward by the Biden-Harris administration. Working families and unions built the American middle class, and working families and unions helped to make the nation what it is today, the strongest, most powerful nation in the world. Every worker in America deserves to be paid a living wage and treated with dignity and respect. Over the past few decades, corporations have worked to undermine and weaken workers' fundamental rights to organize and collectively bargain. We should, for example, pass the PRO Act, which would safeguard and strengthen workers' fundamental right to organize and ensure that workers are able to decide whether or not to join a union through a fair process. It would help restore fairness to an economy that has been rigged against workers for too long. We owe it to workers and families to create an economy that works for them, not for the corporate interests. Pro-worker nominees like Elizabeth Watson help us realize this goal. The Senate should advance her nomination. So I ask unanimous consent that the Senate consider the following nomination. Elizabeth Schaaf Watson of Maryland, calendar number 687, to be Assistant Secretary of Labor, that the nomination be confirmed, that the motion to reconsider be considered made and laid upon the table with no intervening action or debate, that no further motions be in order to the nomination, that any related statements be printed in the record, and that the President be immediately notified of the Senate's action.
Is there objection?
Madam President.
The Senator from Indiana.
Reserving the right to object, the Assistant Secretary of Labor for Congressional and Intergovernmental Affairs works closely with congressional leaders and staff on a variety of issues, including legislation proposals, hearings, briefings, requests for information, and general topics. It's essential that the nominee is willing to work with both Democrats and Republicans in a bipartisan fashion. Elizabeth Watson is currently the Executive Director of the Congressional Progressive Caucus Center, Director of the Congressional Progressive Caucus Center, hardly a springboard of bipartisanship. During the previous administration, Mrs. Watson has retweeted posts such as, "White supremacists don't belong in the White House," referring to President Trump. Her past actions have cast doubt on her ability to be impartial and her willingness to work in a bipartisan manner. My concerns with this nominee are not unique, and there are many other members that have concerns as well. There should be a vote on this nominee. Therefore, I object.
Objection is heard.
Madam President, I want to set aside my next portion of remarks in a separate place in the record, if I can ask consent for that.
Without objection.
Madam President, thank you very much. I rise this evening to share the urgent need to pass a bipartisan bill, a piece of legislation we've been working on for years now, that will save the lives of children. Every year, emergency rooms across the country treat over 22,000 preventable injuries. 22,000 preventable injuries caused by falling furniture like dressers or television sets. On average, roughly half of those injured are children. And the vast majority of those killed by furniture tip-overs, some 81%, are children. 81% of all those killed by furniture tip-overs are children. The death of a child is an unspeakable loss. There's no way to calculate it, and if you haven't lived through it, I don't think any of us can understand what some families have lived through. Yet in America, the most powerful nation on the earth, in less than 20 years, more than 460 children have been killed by these furniture tip-overs. And that number is the reported fatality number. Compounding the grief and loss that these families experience is the fact that these deaths might have been prevented. The answer here is pretty simple: mandatory stability standards that would make our homes safer for our children. For years now, Senator Klobuchar, Senator Blumenthal, Senator Cotton, and I have led a bipartisan effort to pass the STURDY Act. Here's what all the letters in that acronym stand for: the Stop Tip-Overs of Unstable, Risky Dressers on Youth. We call it the STURDY Act. The STURDY Act would require the Consumer Product Safety Commission to create a mandatory stability standard for furniture. That's all it does, create a mandatory stability standard. It would require companies to ensure their products are tested for safety and stability before being sold. It's a simple, common sense requirement that will save the lives of children and prevent injuries. Families in Pennsylvania and across the nation have been waiting too long for the Senate to act. There are families like the Lamberts and the Kalluses who have experienced every parent's worst nightmare: the loss of a child. These families have given my staff permission for me to share their stories tonight on the Senate floor. Two stories. I'll start with what you can see on my left. Katie Lambert. Katie Lambert in 2005 was 3 years old, just 3 years old. Her mom, Judy, describes her as, quote, everything a 3-year-old child should be, full of love and spontaneity, unquote. Katie loved Thomas the Tank Engine. She loved Buzz Lightyear. And of course, she loved her older brothers. Katie's family had just moved into their new home in Huntington Valley, Pennsylvania, in southeastern Pennsylvania. One day, Katie was playing in her room while her mom painted in the room next door. Suddenly, Judy heard an awful crash, as she described it. Judy ran into the room to find 3-year-old Katie crushed beneath a tall, mirrored wardrobe. The wardrobe had been on a carpet and was unstable. Judy said, and I quote, while we don't know what Katie was doing, she was probably dancing and watching herself in the mirrors, unquote. She may have bumped up against it or tried to open one of the doors, or maybe the vibration of her dancing in the room was just enough to cause it to become unstable and fall forward on her, unquote. That's what her mom, Judy, said. And you can see from this photograph a beautiful little child, Katie Lambert, who died on that day. As her mom, Judy, held her, waiting for an ambulance to arrive, Katie took her last breath. She would have been 21 years old this year, and Judy wonders, what would she be like today? What would she look like as a young woman? What college would she have chosen? What career path? Would she like spicy food like her brothers do? Judy Lambert wanted me to share a message today, and it's quoted right here on this poster. Quote, "Please do everything you can to ensure that no other family suffers the pain we do," unquote. So said a mom about what we should do when we think of this child. And then Judy went on to say, "I'm begging you to pass the Sturdy Act now," unquote. We should listen to her words and act. The second child I'll talk about tonight is Kallus. Another family, the Kallus family, experienced a similar tragedy in their home in Westchester, Pennsylvania. Curran was just 2 years old with blonde hair and deep blue eyes that his mom, Jackie, described as, quote, soulful, unquote. Curran loved his cars. He would carefully display his collection of them in a perfect line. In February of 2014, Jackie walked into Curran's bedroom to wake him for the day. She discovered Curran's 5-drawer dresser had fallen on him. Curran was trapped between it and his bed. As she waited for an ambulance to arrive, Jackie tried to resuscitate Curran, but was later told by the paramedics that he had no vital signs when they took over. In the months after Curran's death, Jackie would sometimes stumble on his toy cars hidden around the house, reminders of her spirited son, Curran. Obviously, Jackie and her family's life will never, ever be the same. But here's what she told us in memory of her son. She said, "Even if I live until 100, it's going to be before Curran and after Curran," unquote. Just 2 stories tell us all we need to know about why we have to pass this bill. We could tell a lot more from Pennsylvania and so many other states, represented by those senators I mentioned and represented by senators from other states. There's no reason at all for families to endure this unimaginable grief. But tragically, families across the nation share similar stories of losing children to these horrific furniture tip-over accidents. You'll hear more of their stories from my colleagues in the days ahead. But in the memory of Katie and Curran and so many others who were lost to their families, killed in these tragedies, we must pass the Sturdy Act. It's not complicated at all. We must ensure that the furniture sold to consumers is tested for safety and tested for stability. Congress must do all it can. We in the Senate must do all we can to ensure that no more children are harmed or killed by furniture tip-overs. Madam President, thank you, and I yield the floor and would note the absence of a quorum.
The clerk will call the roll.
Ms. Baldwin.